Sure. I'll just welcome you. Uh, Hello, everyone. Welcome to this evening's teaching, people who are at the center and people who are online. I'm very happy to welcome Venerable Legden back to CKSL. Uh, we all know Venerable Legden, but I'll still give him a short introduction. He's from the US. He studied at Wesleyan College and Harvard Divinity School, and he received his ordination vows from His Holiness and is currently studying the Geshe program at Seraje Monastery. Uh, Venerable's teachings are full of practical insights because of his deep knowledge of the Dharma. And I especially enjoy the way he helps us, use the Dharma, apply the Dharma in our personal struggles and in making sense of the chaotic world around us. Today, he's teaching us, giving a teaching on the Wheel of Sharp Weapons, which is a poem written by Dharma Rakshita and it is in the Lojong tradition. It helps us understand the ins and outs of karma, how to create the causes for happiness, and how to turn our minds from a state of self centeredness to a state of concern for others. So, thank you very much, Venerable, for being here. And now, Venerable Lekden.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, whether in person or online. Very glad we could spend time together. It's been a while since I've been here. I know you've had a busy winter break session with Geshe Namdak visiting a few times, and then Geshe-ma visited once. So it's wonderful that that time was able to be productive here at the center. Now we're going to try to get back into our regular flow of things a little bit. And so this is the start of that. I'll be teaching the next 9 weeks, every other week. Right now, it looks like every other week in person. Venerable Keldenla and Venerable Gache won't be able to teach for a while. They have some things in the monastery that are keeping them busy, and they're not allowed to take as much time off this year, it looks like. So we have the next 9 weeks planned out, and then we'll see where we go from there. But anyway, I'm very glad to be back. I've missed it very much. I missed all of you. So thank you so much. Let's start by making a sacred space for ourselves. So whatever we've been doing all day today, whatever dust from the street has fallen on our shoulders, we wipe it off and create a space where all of our worldly activities, whatever has been running through our minds all day, we put it aside and bring our attention to the Dharma in front of us. The reason we've come together today is to study the Dharma, so we want to make space for that. Emotional space, right? And with that, we set a strong motivation that the reason we have come together today is so we can study the teachings of the Buddha, so we can learn about the path to enlightenment, not merely for our own benefit, but so that we might be able to benefit others. I think this isn't on. Back there. You did. So we set the strong motivation that our goal is to not merely find respite or happiness for ourselves alone, but so that we might develop on the path so we can be of more service to others. And it is true that this will bring happiness and calm and serenity in our own lives, but that should not be our goal, right? Our goal should be, how can we be of service to others? And so setting that strong bodhicitta motivation, we will begin today's teaching, and we'll start with some preliminary prayers. So we'll start with Refuge and Bodhicitta on page 34 of this golden book. We will do 3 times in Tibetan and then once in English. And then we'll continue in English with some of the other prayers. Sangye chiran soki chonam la jancho baru dagni kapsu chi dagi jin sogi pe sonam gi jola penche sangye drupar sho Sangye chiran soki chonam la jancho baru dagni kapsu chi dagi jin sogi pe sonam gi Jola penche sange ju parto sange shiran soki shonam la chanchu pardo dagni kapsu shiragi jinsogi pesonam gi Jola penche sange ju parto. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence, and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. Mandala we will offer once in Tibetan and then once in English. And so generally, as we offer a mandala, we visualize the entire universe, multiple universes. We purify the world around us into an infinite Buddha field full of universes and offer them to the teachers and to the Buddha, both to request teachings and to request the blessings of the Buddha. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, four continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field, and I offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Gurana Mandala Kamniyataya. We'll continue with offering praise to Shakyamuni Buddha on page 73. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the full destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakti clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the full destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme God of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakti clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme amongst humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides, and then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, form supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not. Incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime, pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3 ever devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms, atoms, in all aspects. With supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see, condition things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all sea, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. Great. Thank you. So as I mentioned, it's really great that we can have our program resuming again. And I'm excited to continue teaching on this Lojong text with the sharp opens. You know, when the world is so volatile right now, and when it's like that, having a regular practice is when it's most important, right? When everything is going great, practice is a lot easier and a lot less important. I mean, it's always important, so don't misquote me on that. But you know what I mean, right? Having the stability of a dedicated practice makes the craziness of the world around us easier to navigate. Right? So when things get harder on the outside, having a place like this, whether it be the center or these teachings or just your everyday practice, becomes more critical. Not because it's an escape from the world, because that's not what Dharma is, right? Dharma isn't an escape. What it is a chance to actually understand yourself and the world more clearly so that when you have to go back into the chaos, you can do so with a calm mind and with a heart that's open and is willing to engage in things in a meaningful way, right? So it turns down the volume a little bit to give you more clarity. It's not an escape. It doesn't get rid of the chaos. It teaches you a way that you can live within the chaos and not be overwhelmed by it, right? You know, when we study Dharma, we have to make sure that we aren't bringing our worldly life and worldly affairs into the Dharma. But what we're doing is taking the Dharma and bringing it to the world. That's what we have to do, right? And so it's easy to be like, oh, I'm too busy to meditate today. I'm too busy to study because there's so many things going on. What we're doing is taking the worldly life and letting the worldly life infiltrate our Dharma practice, our spiritual practice, right? And that's not helpful to us or to others. So what we need to do is learn how to make our spiritual practice be the armor we wear, and then bring that to the world. So it's easy to get caught up in both, right? It's easy to let the outside world overtake our Dharma practice. Or even to let our Dharma practice be like an escapist, thing. Like I need to meditate every day. That's how I calm down. So my 15 minutes at night is like my calm down time. Like that's a way people use meditation That's not really an appropriate way to use Dharma. If it's helping you and the world is so chaotic, you need that, then great. I'm not saying don't do it, but it's not the most beneficial thing Dharma can offer us, right? But that is bringing the outside world into our Dharma practice, as opposed to bringing our Dharma practice out, right? So we always constantly need to be pushing outwards with our practice in that way. But in order to push outwards, we have to look inward. Like that's the beauty of Dharma, is that it's doing both at once. By doing one, we get the tools to do the other, hypothetically. Doesn't always feel that way. You know, I often talk at the beginning of any of our classes. We use the analogy of a pond, right? To be an appropriate student who is receiving teachings, you want to avoid the three faults of a broken pot or a faulty pot or a faulty vessel, right? The first one being, since you all know this, so I can go through these quickly, but right, we don't want to be like a pot that's upside down, which is, what does that mean? What's that analogy for?
Stuff just flows off. I mean, we hear it, but nothing. We don't practice it. It just be open to
so open-minded, right? And open-minded listening, right? Open-minded, like that. And the next one is we don't want to be like a pot that has a crack in it. So what does that mean?
You just take it and you kind of let it go. Like you don't retain it. You just hear it and it just goes out of your.
So that's what you're avoiding. So then what are you cultivating?
But taking it in, like absorbing it.
practice.
Yeah.
This mindfulness in this sense, mindfulness and attention and introspection when you're receiving new material is that you're actually trying to retain it, as you say. What you're saying is correct. I'm just trying to give you the words to remember. Yeah. So you don't want to be like an overturned pot because then nothing gets filled, right? You have a closed mind. You don't want to be like a pot with a crack in it because even if it fills the pot, it then leaves because you haven't put the effort in to retain it. And you don't want to be like a pot that is stained with, they say, some sort of poison. I don't know why you'd be putting poison in your water pots, but whatever it is that's staying in there, no matter how clean the water is going to pollute whatever water is in there, whether it's poison or something else. And so that is to say, we don't want to have preconceptions going in, right? So it's very similar to having an open mind. We don't want to have judged whatever the material is or the teacher is or any of these things. And that's not to say don't be critical. And that's not to say don't have your own ideas. But it's when you attend to any new teaching, whether it be a teacher or a new teaching center or a new topic, always let your prejudices, your baggage sit on the side and then try to observe it openly. And then you can use a critical eye and say, okay, well, how does this line up with this? How does this do this, right? But criticism is encouraged. But there's that difference between being critical and being skeptical, right? Skeptical is centering your ego, saying, I know what's right, this is wrong. Where critical is saying, I'm trying to look at all the pieces and see how they fit together, right? So we want to cultivate those three attitudes, right? Being open-minded, being attentive, and being without any prejudice. And that isn't, so we talk about that in context of how to be an appropriate student, how to receive a teaching, right? But it's not just about receiving teachings. It is, we can relate those three to the whole point of Dharma, right? To the whole point of our Dharma practice. Because our Dharma practice isn't, I mean, this is going to sound like really rough, but like Dharma practice isn't about platitudes. It isn't about comfort, right? Like it's not made to make us comfortable. Now, we get comfort as a result quite often, but that's not the goal of Dharma. The goal of Dharma is to understand ourselves, right? To understand our minds, to understand the world around us, and to have a clear relationship with the world and with other people and with these things, right? And with ourselves, especially. And we spend so long, being led around by our delusions that quite often getting that clear picture is painful or difficult. It involves getting rid of old habits. So it's not about comfort, the Dharma. It's about the truth, right? It's about learning how to face reality in a meaningful way. And so sometimes, quite often, especially with this Lojong material, it can be uncomfortable. Because we look at our own self-grasping mind and our self-cherishing mind, and we realize so much of the suffering we experience is our own fault. And so it's not comfortable to look at our habits and to say, oh, wow, I'm creating the suffering. So Dharma isn't about our comfort. And so if we think of it that way, Dharma is about understanding the world clearly and understanding our minds clearly. Then we can apply those three things, being open-minded and receptive, being attentive and aware, and not carrying our prejudice with us, we can apply those three things to our whole Dharma practice, not just to our teaching or to our receiving teachings, right? So those three attitudes are attitudes we should be cultivating all the time. And the Dharma is like training, because samsara is difficult. So we need to build up resilience against samsara. When we've been practicing, it does feel like comfort. Because, it's refuge. That's what it is. It protects us from samsara. So Dharma is comfort in that way, when we actually have an understanding of Dharma. But it takes work to get there, right? That's the difficulty. It's not just giving you nice things to hear to make you feel good about yourself. Dharma, for me, is the ultimate comfort. It's the ultimate safety. That's what refuge means. But you have to work to get there. I can't just say nice things to you and make you feel good about yourself. That's not how Dharma works, right? Dharma works by saying, this is reality. Take a look at it, and take a look in this mirror and see what you see. And then when you see it, it may be difficult. But then, as a result of that, you find comfort. You find patience. You find serenity. You find the tools that you already have to deal with the world around you, right? So for me, Dharma is comfort, but it's not about comfort. That's not the goal. Our comfort, our worldly happiness is not the goal of Dharma. The goal is much bigger than that. I'm sure I've shared this story before, but one of my teachers at Sarah is Geshe Noan Sangye, who's the current abbot at Gyume Tantric Monastery. And he's one of the main, he's been at Gyume now, this is his 6th year, because he's basically in line to be the Ganden throne holder. And the way you do that is you serve for 3 years as the Lama Ude at Gyume, and then 3 years as the abbot at Gyume, and then you eventually become what's called Jansei Choji Rinpoche, and then you eventually become Kana Chuba. Like, it's a whole pipeline situation. And he was chosen to do that. So he's been away for 6 years. But he is a very popular teacher at Sarah J. And he has a lot of students. He teaches basically 5 or 6 hours a day, teaching all of our material. But he'd also give me, I've had private classes with him for the last decade or 12 years or something. And I showed up to his class once, and he was waiting for me. And he said, "How are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm good." And he looked at me and goes, "How can you be good? This is samsara." And the word for like "how are you," it's like the expression in Tibetan is like if you say it formally, and he always says it very formally. He calls me Geshe-la because he wants to embarrass me, so he uses like all honorific language. And so you're like, so it's very embarrassing. But yeah, so you say "kuso debo yimbe." So like, how is your body doing? Like, how are you feeling? But it means like, how are you? So kuso debo yimbe, and you say debo yin, I'm well. Depo is like I'm doing well. And then my answer was, well, jigtengi depo, like worldly okay. And he goes, jigtengi depo, that's only suffering. Worldly happiness is only suffering. And I'm like, Genlam, what do you want me to say? Like, he loves to put you in that situation where no matter what you say, he's gonna poke at you, right? So the point of that story, other than the fact that if you get a chance to have teachings from Geshe Noan Sangye, you should, because he's wonderful. He teaches sometimes. He teaches in Tibetan. He's from Ladakh. But he teaches in Tibetan, but he does teach. He has taught a number of times at the Institute Lama Tsongkhapa in Italy, as well as in some of the centers in California, the ones that Geshe Letsok now is a teacher at. So he's been part of, like, he does tours with those FPMT centers. And then he's taught throughout India as well. But he teaches in Tibetan. But there's always a translator when he teaches, or when he teaches at Dharma centers like this. But the point of that is that story is to remind us that worldly happiness, worldly comfort, worldly pleasure, they may come as a result of our Dharma practice, but it should never be our goal. The Dharma is not about our worldly happiness, right? It's about something much bigger than that. And so when we get worldly happiness, we can appreciate it for what it is. And we can say that I have the circumstances right now to be feeling this. That's great. I'm going to ride that wave. But then when it goes away, I'm not going to be upset by it, right? I'm not going to let my mind be grasping onto it as if this was the meaning of my practice. So Dharma is about work, right? And it's about how, this sounds really bombastic, but Dharma is about how to change the world. And we change the world by changing ourselves, right? If you study like texts like the Kalachakra Tantra, which is Holiness teaches and gives initiations on quite often, the whole first chapter of the Kalachakra is called the outer Kala chakra. This is on the commentary on it. And that's explaining all how creation existed and all the cosmos and like everything from like the most minute measurement, like what like the size of a flea has a name, and then like 5 of those is this, and then 10 of those is this. Like it explains everything. It explains all the constellations, the movement of the stars, all it's called the outer Kala chakra. Then the second chapter is called the inner Kala chakra. And it's all about how the whole external world is mapped onto the internal world, right? And so we have to get rid of this division between the outer and the inner worlds and realize that they are maps of one another, right? And so if we want to change the world, we change ourselves. And that's what Dharma teaches us to do. It teaches us to get rid of all of our delusions, all of our habitual tendencies, and to always focus on how we can be of service to others with a mind that is clear, balancing wisdom and method, right?
Venerable, Kala Chakra means wheel of time.
Correct. Yeah. The wheel of time. And His Holiness has given that initiation quite often. He feels it's important for world peace. It's a highest Yoga Tantra initiation, but he invites even non-Buddhists to attend because he thinks that just being in the attendance, you'll receive blessings. And this isn't noticeable in the actual initiation practice, but if you study the Kala Chakra, the first chapter, which talks about the outer Kala Chakra, talks about an apocalyptic war. You know, I mean, you see a lot of Western scholars, like 19th century and 20th century Tibetologists, they love the Kala Chakra because it reminds them of Revelation from the Christian scripture because it talks about an apocalypse, right? And it talks about an army and the four generals that have to defeat the barbarian hordes. And it talks about all these things in like really apocalyptic language. And then you get to the inner Kala Chakra and you say, well, the 4 generals are love, compassion, joy. They're not the 4 immeasurables, but they're like that: love and compassion. I don't remember the other 2. And the barbarian hordes are all of your afflicted minds, like this. So it maps out all of this external language, which people, the Western scholars, I mean, I'm talking 20th century Western scholars that had access to these, really like won over by this the Tibetan apocalyptic vision of the world. But then you get to the important parts, and they say, no. The apocalypse is here, right? Like it's not about the external world. That's just giving you like the taste so that you have a framework to understand it. But so because of that, it does talk about the destruction of the world, and then the peace that comes after that is part of the root text. So that's why His Holiness likes to give that to large audiences, because he believes that it is instrumental in bringing about world peace. Right? Yeah, it's not quite the same, but I mean, you can find those analogies, I'm sure, if you want. Yeah.
Is there one planned sometime?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
He just turned 90 last year. It's a very extensive initiation, and so I don't imagine he has not shown that he is interested in doing like long teachings like that right now. So I don't know if there's another one planned. There might be. You never know. If it'll be beneficial, then he will. Right. So Dharma is about cultivating a revolution, an inner revolution, revolting against our self-cherishing mind, our self-grasping mind. And Lojong, for me, is one of the most beneficial and direct ways to do that. Because the Lojong teachings, the mind training teachings, are all about how to confront self-cherishing. All the different ways that self-cherishing has created more problems than it has created benefit for us in our life. Right? What I think is important to remember, especially when you study Lojong, the text we're studying today isn't quite as, it can be a little bit heavy, but some of the Lojong texts are very like direct and very cutting, right? Is that our self-cherishing mind and our self-grasping mind, they come from a place of fundamental insecurity, right? A lack of real confidence. And so to face them takes courage. That's why bodhisattvas are called warriors, right? It's one of the language for a Pao is a warrior or a hero. Right? Because to actually practice this path takes courage. It takes resiliency, it takes diligence, it takes determination, and it's not easy, right? So you have to have the courage of a warrior to actually try to cultivate this mind. But then the flip side of that is, so much of walking the path of Dharma is like self-reinforcing. Because when you've done a little bit of work, just a little bit, and you realize that you're able to have this moment of compassion naturally without having to force it. Let's say when someone insulted you, your first instinct, even for just a moment, was compassion. Then you can think about how monumental of an achievement that is, because how many obstacles have we had in our life where that is not the natural response, right? So to practice bodhicitta and to engage in Lojong study especially, you need to have courage. And that is what these teachings kind of rely on, us being courageous, right? So we started this text my last session, but I thought I'd review a little bit just about the text so we can reorient ourselves with this text and then and go from there. So this is one of the oldest mind training texts that we have. Dhammarakshita was one of Atisha's 3 teachers who taught him, he had 155 gurus, but he had 3 teachers who taught him bodhicitta. And those 3 are Serlingpa, that's the most famous one, who was from Indonesia. He's also sometimes called Dharma Kirti Sri. And he was a Chittamatra teacher, and he taught Atisha in Indonesia. And then you have Maitri Yogi in India, who was called the Wandering Yogi. And I'm not quite sure the specifics he taught him. But then lastly, you have Dharmarakshita, who I don't know where Atisha met him, but he, for some time, was at Odantapuri Monastic University, which was a monastery in Bihar between the 8th and the 11th centuries. And then it was destroyed in the 11th century. I don't think Atisha met him there. I'm not sure where their paths crossed. But in any case, he taught these 2 texts to Atisha, the Peacock in the Poison Grove and the Wheel of Sharp Weapons. And we don't have any records of these texts except Atisha's transcription of them in Tibet. Right? So these are the only records we have of these texts. But if you look at the collection of mind training texts, these seem to be the oldest. We have the root verses of mind training and so forth. Those all come from Atisha and afterwards. So, we see things from Shantideva, and in the Bodhicharyavatara, there is mind training teachings, right? There's little bits of mind training. We see the mind training lineage, but the Bodhicharyavatara, for instance, isn't a mind training text. It just has little bits of mind training messages throughout, right? But for actual dedicated mind training texts, these are, that I know, the oldest. So we're studying the Wheel of Sharp Weapons. The other one, like I said, is Peacock in the Poison Grove. Those are the 2 texts by Dhammarakshita. Now, Dhammarakshita his philosophical system was one of the lower tenet systems, the Vaibhashikas. But his practice was Mahayana practice, right? And he's one of the ones who taught Atisha bodhicitta. So his practice was Mahayana, even though the philosophical view that he followed was Hinayana, which is one of the reasons, again, when you take bodhisattva vows, one of our vows is to never degrade or never denigrate the Hinayana or the Hinayana teachings. And it's because the view and the practice are wildly different, right? And so when you study tenets, it can be very confusing to say, like, well, I'm a Mahayana practitioner, but they're practicing the lower path and all these. It gets very confusing between the philosophical view and the path and all these things. For me, it's a good reminder that anyone can be a valid teacher. Even if they're not a Buddhist, they may not be teaching me Dharma, but they have the opportunity to teach me something. Part of the joy of attending divinity school and getting a master's divinity degree is that I have a lot of friends who are ministers in other faith traditions and denominations, and you can see how they're practicing their faith, whether it be Christianity or Judaism or Islam or whatever it may be, makes them such wonderful people and makes them serve others in such meaningful ways, in ways that they couldn't do if they didn't have that faith, right? And now those faiths, like on a spiritual level or a philosophical level, don't make sense. Like they don't work for me and for my path, but I can see how that faith allows them to be the best person possible, right? And so I have access to, like, I have, a very good friend of mine. I didn't meet him at Harvard. I actually met him. I was at the FPMT Center in Boston. So while I was at grad school, and I was serving as their SPC, and I was doing some teaching, like some Lamrim teaching and introductory teaching. And he is an Episcopalian priest, and he wanted to learn about Lojong, actually. And so he would come to the center once a week, and I would just give him private classes on Lojong. And I still been in touch with him. So he just, actually messaged me the other day because he's so unhappy with the political situation, and he wanted to know how.
Hi everyone, it seems from what happened that there is a power cut in the center. We'll just wait for a few minutes for the power to come back and for the broadcast to resume. Thank you everyone.
Sorry about that, folks. We had a little bit of a electrical outage here, but we're back. So thank you for being patient. Anyway, the point I was getting at is that obviously I believe that the Dharma and the Tibetan understanding of the Dharma, as taught by Tsongkhapa especially, is what will lead us to Buddhahood, right? And that's the ultimate vehicle to be free from suffering and to help eliminate the suffering of all sentient beings. Yet, I also believe, due to the vagaries of karma and due to the various imprints that many sentient beings have accumulated since the beginning of this time, there are different paths that are going to be more beneficial in this lifetime for certain people than others. And so I work hard not to have any sort of mind of judgment. And so something like this, when you learn that the Dharma Rakshita, who wrote this amazing mind training text, and mind training is considered Mahayana material, right? And he was a Bodhicitta teacher for Atisha. His philosophical system was the Hinayana system. For me, that's just a really actually exciting thing to remember because it forces me to like not be locked into my bubble of saying this is the best way of doing things, right? Or not that this is the best way, but rather since you are this, then you can't also be that, right? It helps break down boundaries for me, that I do my best not to live in those kind of boundaries, but we set them up anyway, right? All the time. So I appreciate that about this text and about this author. So the Wheel of Sharp Weapons is 117 verses, which isn't that long, relatively speaking. And the very simple outline is that the first 102 verses have to do with conventional bodhicitta. And then from verse 103 to 116 is ultimate bodhicitta. And the last verse is a dedication verse. So we talked about the two bodhicittas, right? So conventional bodhicitta is what we think about when we say bodhicitta, the aspiration or the wish to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. And that is called conventional bodhicitta, or the conventional Mahayana awakening mind. And ultimate bodhicitta is then the realization of emptiness. More explicitly, ultimate bodhicitta is the direct realization of emptiness in the mind of an Arya Bodhisattva. But it is what's important for our purposes is that when we're talking about emptiness, that's ultimate bodhicitta. And then when we're talking about bodhicitta, that's conventional bodhicitta. Whenever anything gets the word ultimate in front of it, it's probably going to be about emptiness, right? That's the easy thing to remember. Not always. Like we would say in debate, there's no pervasion. I could find an example that if you agree to that, I could prove you wrong. But in general, that's a good starting ground. So we covered both of those in this text. And there's, Tibetans, they love their outlines. I could give you an outline of like every verse, essentially, of what each verse is doing. We don't need that detailed of an outline. But we will go over the verses that we already studied. So we got through the first 8 verses or so. And the first 7 verses are all about how to transform afflictions into the path of practice. And then verse 8 introduces Tonglen, the practice of giving and taking, which is a critical meditative practice that is part of the Lojong tradition, right? And I think you all know that practice already, so I won't go into details here. So what I thought we would do today is we'll recite those verses together, and if you have questions about them, we can go over those questions first, but I won't, if there aren't any questions about them, then I won't discuss those verses since we have gone over them, even though it was weeks ago. But sometimes reading them fresh brings up new questions, that's fine. And then we'll continue from there for the rest of today's class. That was at least the general plan that works. So the epigraph says, the name of this work is The Wheel of Sharp Weapons, effectively striking the heart of the foe. That could also be translated as effectively striking the enemy's most vital point, they often translate. And then the author offers an homage, prostration, which is always at the beginning of almost every text. And this here he pays homage to Yamantaka, right? I pay heartfelt homage to you, Yamantaka. Your wrath is opposed to the great Lord of Death. So Yamantaka is the wrathful emanation of wisdom. And Yama Antaka literally means the destroyer of death. Right? But he's not destroying like worldly death. What he's destroying through his blazing wisdom is the death of, he's destroying your ignorance, and therefore, anyway, this is going to tantra territory. But so we don't have to talk about it. Yamantaka comes up in the second half of the text, so we can talk about it there. It's interesting that this text is dedicated to Yamantaka. You don't see that often in texts that are focused on compassion, because he is, like I said, he is a wrathful emanation of wisdom, not compassion, right? All the Buddhas are all Buddhas, so he has infinite compassion, but he's not often evoked for this. But that shows right at the beginning that even though this is a text focused on how we get rid of the self-cherishing mind, and we do that by developing a mind that is cherishing others, right? Those two always go hand in hand, that this needs like a wrathful approach. It doesn't need a placid, easy approach. And Chenrezig, Avalokiteshvara, is a peaceful Buddha as opposed to a wrathful Buddha. There are wrathful emanations of Chenrezig. For instance, at Sarajay, our protector is Hayagriva, and Hayagriva is a wrathful emanation of Chenrezig, right? Surrounded by flames, and he has a horse head and all these things. But those are less common, right? So Yamataka, even though he is recognized as a Buddha that is embodying wisdom, that wisdom is what's helping us cut through the self-grasping mind, which is then the mind that causes our self-cherishing. So for him to start the text with this homage is something that's worth noting. It's you learn when you study at the monastery. When I'm studying a text like this, we will spend 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, just debating that one verse. Every small legal detail matters. And it's not just debating. If you look at like commentaries, you might, not for this text in general, but like for a text that I'm studying, the first 30 pages of the commentary might only be about the title of the text. So when you study Madhyamaka, we study Madhyamaka for 4 years. And the first 2 years, we study the textbook written by Jesuit Gyalten, who is a textbook author for Sergei. The last 2 years, we study the same material by Tsongkhapa, by his Gompa the Gompa clarifying the intent. Both of those are commentaries on the Madhyamaka Avatara, right? So literally the first month of debate and the first 20 pages of both those commentaries are like, why is Madhyamaka Avatara called Madhyamaka Avatara? Like, what does Madhyamaka mean? What does Avatara mean? And literally 20 pages of commentary just on the title alone. So it seems like a silly thing. And it's easy for us to like say, that's not important. I want to get to the important part of the text, right? But like Dharmarachita chose to pay homage to the Yamataka for a reason. And so it's useful for us when we engage in text to say, like, why is this what was chosen, right? We don't have to talk about that now, but I'm just saying in general, like, I want to get to the good stuff, but like my habit is like, this doesn't matter. This is all like the extra material, but it's not. Like everything matters, right? So we have to train ourselves. And maybe you already don't. Maybe you don't have to. Maybe you're already like that. I'm like always trying to rush ahead. So for me, it's a practice slowing down and saying, no, this is all deliberate, right? And so how is this affecting the bigger picture? But so let's read through the first 8 verses together. And then if there are any questions that come up, we'll address those before we move on. In jungles of poisonous plants strut the peacocks, though medicine gardens of beauty lie near. The masses of peacocks do not find gardens pleasant, but thrive on the essence of poisonous plants. In similar fashion, the brave bodhisattvas remain in the jungle of worldly concern. No matter how joyful this world's pleasure gardens, these brave ones are never attracted to pleasures, but thrive in the jungle of suffering and pain. We spend our whole life in the search for enjoyment, yet tremble with fear at the mere thought of pain. Thus, since we are cowards, we are miserable still. But the brave bodhisattvas accept suffering gladly and gain from their courage a true lasting joy. Now, desire is the jungle of poisonous plants here. Only brave ones like peacocks can thrive on such fare. If cowardly beings like crows were to try it, because they are greedy, they might lose their lives. How can someone who cherishes self more than others take lust and such dangerous poisons for food? If he tried like a crow to use the other delusions, he would probably forfeit his chance for release. And thus, bodhisattvas are likened to peacocks. They live on delusions, those poisonous plants, transforming them into the essence of practice. They thrive in the jungle of everyday life. Whatever is presented, they always accept, while destroying the poison of clinging desire. Uncontrollable wandering through rounds of existence is caused by our grasping at egos as real. This ignorant attitude heralds the demon of selfish concern for our welfare alone. We seek some security for our own egos. We want only pleasure. We shun any pain. But now we must banish all selfish compulsion and gladly take hardship for all others' sake. All of our sufferings derive from our habits of selfish delusions that we heed and act out. As all of us share in this tragic misfortune, which stems from our narrow and self-centered ways, we must take all our sufferings and the miseries of others and smother our wishes of selfish concern. Yeah.
So the suffering is because, just talking about the ego, I had a question.
Okay.
The reason we develop an ego is because we want to avoid pain, right? So we come up with various ways in which to protect that ego. Right? What are the delusions?
Well, it does depend on what we mean by ego, which is, I'm not quite sure that's been here. But so when we think of self-grasping and self-cherishing, they're two different things, right? And so what's the difference between self-grasping and self-cherishing to start with?
Self-cherishing is my pleasure or my concerns are more valid than
Others, right? My happiness is most important. The world revolves around me. That's self-cherishing.
Right.
I want self-grasping.
Self-grasping is seeing oneself as completely separate, as a separate person from not appreciating the interconnectedness or not knowing that there is something.
Yeah. So it's grasping at the self as if it truly existed, right? So self-grasping is the grasping at the true existing I, truly existing I. When we have self-grasping of phenomena and self-grasping of persons, both, but when we grasp at the I, the me, as if it really truly existed from its own side, that is the self-grasping mind. That's the fundamental ignorance. That is the root cause of samsara. And now, in general, the way it's taught specifically is that the root of samsara is the self-grasping mind. Then very quickly after that is the self-cherishing mind. When you're studying Lojong texts, we look at self-cherishing mind almost as more important. We say the cause of all your suffering is the self-cherishing mind. So on the debate courtyard, that wouldn't hold up because you'd say, well, the self-cherishing mind itself has as its cause self-grasping, and therefore that is the real cause of samsara, right? Like that is how you debate it. I mean, the scholars say, yeah, that's true, but that's not important for right now, right? Like you're not on the debate court right now. So it's important to understand that the way we study things is sometimes a little bit different. In Lojong, since the purpose is destroying the self-cherishing mind, we talk about that as almost more important than self-grasping. And that comes up in this text as well. So ego can be both the self-grasping mind or the self-cherishing mind, right? In a worldly sense of the contemporary use of the word ego, we have to see what do we mean. Is it the mind that says I'm more important than everyone else, my happiness is more important, or is it that mind that grasps onto me as if I really exist? Right? It's both, right? But so we don't create the ego, right? That the fundamental ignorance that is the root of samsara is what we call a type of delusion that is innate, right? It isn't one we learn. Fundamental ignorance, grasping at the self as if it truly existed, is an innate delusion, as opposed to one you learn by studying a tenet system or a philosophical system that's incorrect, right? Those are learned delusions. So we don't create the ego intentionally, obviously, right? And the ego, since it considers itself real, then you can see how the self-cherishing mind makes sense. Like if the I did truly exist, then the self-cherishing mind wouldn't be a delusion. It would make sense, right? Because it'd be based on a true thing. So what the I is doing, the self-cherishing mind, or the ego, we can say, is trying to, due to its misunderstanding of the nature of reality, seeking out things that it believes will create happiness and trying to avoid suffering. That's what all sentient beings are doing. But since it doesn't understand the nature of reality, it's doing about it the wrong way, going about it the wrong way. And it's misunderstanding worldly happiness for ultimate happiness, right? So the ego is created to avoid pain and to imbibe in pleasure or to cultivate pleasure. It's not created for that purpose, but that's the natural result of having a self-grasping mind, is that we seek out those things.
And does it get created because of fear, like this self-cherishing and self-grasping? Is it created from this fear that I have nothing solid to hold on to? Like, I'm just wondering what the original conditions of.
So the original conditions again would be the self-grasping mind is the original condition, which is the misunderstanding, the view of the person as if it were truly existing, right? That is the origin point. And that's not based on a fear of suffering or a desire for pleasure, merely misunderstanding the nature of how I exist in the world. And then based on that, seeking out pleasure or trying to avoid pain, right? And then it becomes self-fulfilling. So that first moment of self-grasping, we say since beginning this time, right? That first moment, we're born with a self-grasping mind. As long as you're born in samsara, you have the imprints of self-grasping and you have a self-grasping mind. Right? And so then this idea of seeking out pleasure and trying to avoid pain is the result of grasping at the self. And so then it creates like a feedback loop, right? Because the more of that you have, the more you grasp at the self because you want to defend it, you want to protect it, the more you seek out pleasure. So it creates this negative feedback loop in that way. So to point out any specific instance of it, I could say, well, this self-grasping now is due to you seeking out pleasure, right? You could point out an instance in that way, but to look at the bigger picture, you have to see this like this negative feedback loop that started with thinking of the self as if it truly existed.
It's a habit practiced since beginning.
Since beginning this time. Yeah. That's why we say it's the root of samsara, right? And when you study the 12 links of dependent origination, the first link is the link of ignorance, and that is grasping at the self as if it truly existed, right?
Okay, maybe I'll ask you later, but I'm just curious why this original ignorance happens. Because, somewhere there's something fearful that makes us want to. So maybe I'll ask you later.
Well, it gets to the question when you say the idea of beginningless existence is very hard because you say, well, it's beginningless. So as long as you're a sentient being, you have this. It wasn't like there was an instance where it came about. Now, there are stories the Buddha taught about like how human beings came about. And contemporary scholars debate whether or not he was teaching literally or he's teaching metaphorically, but there is a teaching of how like there were a race of beings who didn't have corporeal bodies. They're more similar to what we consider gods, and then they started like eating like I picture it like cotton candy, like eating like cloud stuff material. But then they started only having possessions, and then they started getting jealous of others, and then they developed a sense of ego, right? And then they developed these worldly bodies as a result of that, and they sunk from the air and became corporeal. And then they started hoarding things because they wanted to have more for later. And so as a result of that, then they created crops, and then they created bartering, and then like this. So there are stories like that that the Buddha taught.
Like a Garden of Eden situation.
Kind of, yeah, except it was up in the sky. But yes, there is like a creation mythos like that. But even those beings existed as samsaric beings, just not human, like not the human beings we understand. And so there's no real pinpoint. You can say like, this is the beginning. That's the whole idea of beginningless. It does make the philosophy a little bit difficult when you're just like beginningless. You don't investigate it too much. But what's more useful is to see what's useful for me, and the way I get around that is I look at my innate readiness to look at myself as if I truly existed, like how inherently easy it is for me to grasp onto the self. And whenever any small thing happens, whether it be good or bad, that immediately I take it as if it was affecting this really truly existing me without even thinking, right? It's so innate. And then when I think about it, I can see how, like throwing a rock in a pond, all the ripples of that. So I don't really worry myself where that original moment was, because I can see it playing out over and over again just in this life right now, right? And so the combination of my faith in the teachings and my faith in karma and my understanding of the kind of logic of karma with my observations of my own experiences in this life can see how self-grasping and self-cherishing are self-perpetuating, right? So even if I can't pinpoint the original moment of it, I can pinpoint how a moment of it now just creates more and more moments of it in the future, right? So for me, that's a satisfying way to understand it in my everyday life. Maybe when I have a more refined understanding of it and I actually start eliminating it, then I can it's more critical to have that,
And if I can just share one more thing, I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's been a few weeks, so you can get us back into the.
So, when I met the holiness, there was a moment of, because there was so much compassion, I didn't feel like I exist. Like it didn't matter. Like it was just, I'm just so accepted that there was no sense of grasping or anything. It just was a moment of that, I'm okay as I am. And suddenly I felt complete lowering of every defense and sense of grasping. And it was very remarkable because I don't feel like that around a lot of people. And so I'm just curious that somewhere when we feel totally safe and okay and receive that unconditional compassion, do we, maybe that self-grasping drops? I don't know. I'm just relating it to what I experienced with him. So
I don't know if our self-grasping drops, but definitely when you're in the presence of, let's say, holy beings, they can affect just your experience of the world around you. And so being in the presence of His Holiness in that way, your mind immediately turns towards virtue, right? And so it could be that your self-cherishing, your self-grasping, they don't disappear, but they're no longer active because you're so overwhelmed by the virtuous and the compassion and the openness that you have from this being in front of you, right? What's important for me, though, is then, okay, you had that, I don't mean you, but like, I have a similar experience when I meet His Holiness. Okay, I had this amazing experience with His Holiness or with Captain Lama Rinpoche or some other teacher. Now, how do I take that experience and bring it with me into the rest of my life? Like, how do I remember, what did I feel like? What was happening in my mind when I met him? What was opening for me? What was closing down for me? How was my mind working? And then how can I cultivate that when I'm not in his presence? Because most of my life is not in his physical presence, right? Even if I'm in his emotional presence, we'll say, right? His Holiness is always thinking of us, but I don't get to be part of his entourage. So then how do I cultivate that same thing? Like, what did being near that holy being do? Was it just merely the power of being near a holy being? Or was it something I can replicate? And the whole point of the Dharma is that we can replicate it. We can do the work to bring it up, to cultivate it again. But it is to say, it's important. Then the flip side of that, I guess, is how can we be that person for others? Right? If you've been in a relationship with someone who just accepts you 100%, you see how easily you fit into that relationship, how comfortable it is, right? That you don't have to worry about saying the wrong thing. You don't have to do any of these things. You just fit. And even if you mess up, you say something wrong, you hurt their feelings, you appreciate, you know that it can be repaired because they see you, they understand you. There's such comfort in that. How can we then do that for others? And we start with those close to us because that's the easiest. But then how can we do that for all sentient beings? How can we serve as a beacon of compassion and acceptance for others so that they feel safe around us, that they don't feel like they have to have guards up, right? And so for me, I often look at His Holiness and I realize, if I experience this because of him, how can I try to be that for others? And I don't have the ability to be like His Holiness, but I can make steps in that direction, right? Like, I can do my best. So it's inspiring in that way, both from my experience, but then also in my practice. Like, I try to have both sides of that. And I will say that, that directly relates to this, because the way you can be of most service to others is by not centering yourself. When you're in a relationship with someone, never mind in a Dharma way, but even in, whether it be a family member or a partner or a coworker or a friend, when you're not focused on your own needs, then you're a much better friend or partner or husband or wife or any of these things, right? When you allow the other person's needs to be more important than your own, then that relationship becomes more organic. So we just have to find a way to cultivate that actively with all sentient beings, and not, and this is an important part, not mix it with attachment, not mix it with lust or with any of the other negative emotions that infiltrate a lot of our best emotions, right? Like, we have love and compassion, but they're often mixed with attachment, with desire, with clinging. So how can we cultivate them free from those, and not focus just on those who are dear to us now, but have a wider audience in mind? Right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you have any other questions about those first verses?
No.
For me, I think what is important to remember about those, and you miss it a little bit in the teaching of it, is that it says that only the peacocks can live in this poisonous jungle and survive happily, right? But if you look at the analogy, we don't have a choice whether or not we live in this poisonous jungle. Samsara is a poisonous jungle. So what it's showing us is not that we have the choice to be like the crows who go live in a medicinal garden. No, we have to become peacocks, because this is the only sustenance that we have, is samsara right now. Right? So we have to learn how to take samsara and transform it into the path. So the analogy falls apart a little bit, right? Because the peacocks could go somewhere else, and they choose to stay in the poisonous grove. But we don't have that choice. Like, we're in the poisonous grove right now. So we have to learn how to be peacocks. Or peahen, I suppose. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Curious about the comparison with the crow. In our, world, the crows are actually cleaning up and, eating the dead things and helping us. But here it says, the crows are greedy. And so.
Yeah, if you think, a lot of the comparisons are very difficult. There's also later, I don't know if it's in the text or in the commentary, but Tibetans don't like cats. You don't want to be like a cat. Cats are always considered duplicitous and very sneaky. So there's a comparison to cats. So I can't really talk about the cultural context for that. But we can say, we look at a crow, we know crows are very smart. They actually can learn how to use tools. They're very intelligent beings, crows and ravens both. But they are going to go after anything, right? And they're not they're attracted to anything shiny, anything moving, anything they can feed themselves, right? But if a crow eats poison, it's still going to get sick and die. Whereas, at least in this analogy, peacocks eat nightshade, especially when they eat some poisonous plants that would cause harm to crows. So here is showing that the crow is indiscriminate, but it doesn't have the wisdom that is necessary. Whereas a peacock is not indiscriminate, but it has the wisdom to point out how can this thing that's dangerous to others be beneficial for me. Some of the animal analogies, we have to just accept that the cultural cachet is a little bit different. Even the idea of peacocks eating poison is already a little bit thin. Like they do eat some poisonous plants, but it's already the metaphor is a little bit stretched. So we just have to kind of accept the metaphor and go a little bit. For me, what's important to remember here, though, is that we don't get the choice. Like the way this presents it is the peacocks choose to go consume poison. We don't get that choice. We're in the desire realm. We're sentient beings. We're in samsara. We're surrounded by suffering, right? So what we have a choice of is either letting that suffering be transformed into a path of practice, where we use that suffering to then transform our minds to be ones of virtue and to be ones of serving others, or we become overwhelmed by that suffering and create more suffering for ourselves. Like that's our option, right? We don't have the option to go somewhere else.
I think the choice is related to the bodhisattvas who have the choice to become like us, to be like us, grasping and everything. But they choose instead to be like the peacocks.
Well, I mean, what it is referencing is that bodhisattvas, when bodhisattvas have committed to serving other sentient beings as opposed to achieving individual liberation, right? So if you look at the two lower paths, right, the Shravaka vehicle and the Pratyeka Buddha vehicle, they achieve moksha, they achieve liberation, which is freedom from samsara, but it's not Buddhahood. And they still have to achieve Buddhahood later by traveling on the Mahayana path, right, which is the Bodhisattva path. So what the peacock does, their choice, is to say, instead of choosing personal liberation and freedom from suffering for myself, I'm choosing to use that suffering to propel me towards Buddhahood as opposed to liberation, right? So that's the distinct. Liberation and Buddhahood are a little bit different in that way. Both of them are free from samsara. Arhats, so Hinayana arhats, we'd say, don't suffer. They don't exist within samsara, but they still have imprints of afflictive, of cognitive obscurations, right? So they still have dualistic view. They still have the appearance of duality in a way that a Buddha does not, right? And so the bodhisattvas do make that choice to stay in samsara longer because, you can become an arhat quite quickly, relatively speaking. Whereas a bodhisattva in the sutra vehicle takes 3 countless great eons between entering the bodhisattva path and becoming Buddha. So that's a longer period of time, right? But the bodhisattvas make that choice for the benefit of sentient beings. So you could look at it that way as well. That's the choice they make. Okay, so that is the verses we covered last time, many weeks ago. We can ask more questions about it if you need. Now, the verses for this week, wow. I don't know. We're not going to cover all the ones I wanted. So the next section, first off, let's talk about, in the title, the wheel of sharp weapons. What does that analogy hold up for? We talked about it, I know last time, but that was many weeks ago. So I can just give you the answer if you need.
Yeah.
Okay, so there are two, the metaphor is, the analogy rather, it has 2 different references. For the first part of it, the wheel of sharp weapons is understood as karma and the ripening of karmic actions. So when we say the wheel of sharp weapons, I don't know, that's the direct translation. Like that's what it says in the Tibetan. And whenever you see images, they often show like a sword, a wheel made of swords, something like this, I think of it more as a boomerang, which is not what the words are there, but like the idea that we've created something that it comes back to us, right? That's the idea that is being represented. And so the wheel of sharp weapons itself is the ripening of karmic actions we've done in the past. So when we do something negative in the past, it creates a karmic seed, or an imprint rather, then that imprint ripens into our experience of suffering in this way. So we engage in non-virtue, and then it loops back, and we experience that as suffering. The result of that, rather. We experience the result of that as suffering. So in these next verses, we're going to bring up the idea of the wheel of sharp weapons returning. What it is, the wheel itself is the ripening of karmic causes that we created in the past, in past lives especially, not necessarily this life. Now, later in the text, those last sections, when it's talking about ultimate bodhicitta, then it uses the idea of the wheel of sharp weapons to be the wheel of emptiness. The wheel, or the mind that realizes emptiness, is the blazing wheel that cuts through ignorance and cuts through samsara and cuts through self-cherishing, I suppose. So those are the two kind of analogies that we have for the wheel. The first one is what we're concerned with now, is that so when we talk about the wheel of sharp weapons, we have to realize we're not talking about our experience of suffering. We're talking about the ripening of karma we created that we experience as suffering. So it's the ripening of karma that is the wheel itself.
So it does not have anything to do with the ripening of virtue that we did.
Not for this. No, not for this text. Yeah, this text is about getting rid of the self-cherishing mind. So it's focused on that. And so these next set of verses, the reason I bring that up is this next set of verses from verse 9 through verse 48 is all about karma. And every verse, for the most part, is looking at a specific action, negative action, and then the result it has. So each verse will start with a type of suffering, and then it'll say this suffering is due to having done this action in the past. And therefore, instead of allowing myself to be overwhelmed by that suffering, I should practice basically Tonglen. I should practice the mind that says this suffering is a result of my own actions, and therefore I want to take that suffering as if it were a peacock consuming poison and give my happiness to others. Right? So every verse is very self-explanatory. So you don't really need a lot of commentary for these verses. I was thinking we might go through them quickly. We'll see, since I've been talking so much. But the point of it, at least for me, is all these specific examples. It shows you the wide variety of suffering, but the wide variety of antidotes to that suffering. So we see that this suffering is a result of this specific action, and therefore this is a way I can avoid creating the conditions for that suffering in the future, right? So all these different examples are showing different antidotes, which is useful, but also sometimes, every lock has a different key. So like you might be reading all these and you say, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Oh, yeah, okay, I was miserly and therefore I experienced poverty. Oh, okay. Then you hit one of them and that one for some reason clicks for you. You know what I mean? For whatever reason. So by having all these examples, one of them might just be the key that you need to kind of unlock something. So having 40 verses of examples, really one verse could do it because it's saying your past actions are now coming back to bite you in the butt. Like that's what it's saying, right? That's the really sharp weapons. You created suffering in the past, or you created non-virtue in the past. That created an imprint. That imprint is ripening, and you're experiencing the ripening as suffering. Full stop. Like that's what it's saying. But now it's going through all the different types of suffering. And another thing is that it shows you like some things we may not think of as suffering. Like the reason the Buddha taught suffering as the first noble truth is because there's a lot of suffering we don't even think about. Like we just accept it as the way things are. So this is showing these are all things that can be prevented, right? And they can be prevented not by trying to block the world out, but by transforming your mind. So there's a lot of examples. And I don't know how much commentary we'll have on all of them. We'll see as we go through. But what's important here, what this text is trying to do, is show the connection between the self-cherishing mind, which then causes you to engage in a non-virtuous action, which is to say you create a negative karma or karmic imprint. And then that karmic imprint ripens into an experience of suffering. And then when you have that experience of suffering, you use that as part of your path and practice Tonglen based on that experience. And so that suffering becomes a virtuous or an opportunity for virtue, right? So you see this cycle that you've created non-virtue, engaged in negative karma, you experience the ripening result of that negative karma, which we label as suffering, and then that inspires us to engage in the practice that will get rid of self-cherishing.
So that is the Tonglen meditation.
Yeah, so almost every verse ends with like a Tonglen aspiration. But what we're trying to do here in this text is show the relationship between mind training and Tonglen and karma, especially, right? So many other mind training texts don't talk about karma. They only just talk about the self-cherishing mind and how it creates suffering. So here he's giving the details, saying your self-cherishing mind caused you to engage in negative karma. That negative karma is then going to create an imprint which will eventually ripen when the conditions are right. That ripening, you experience it as suffering. So now that you can't avoid, right? We've already created those karmas. That suffering, we're going to experience it, right? So now that we know that, we use that experience of suffering to engage in Tonlen practice, to engage in practice that tries to get rid of our self-cherishing mind, but also to know that we need to not engage in those negative actions, the original negative actions that created that negative karma. So when we can see the connection between non-virtue, negative karma, suffering, and then Mahayana practice, then we can work to get rid of those negative actions to begin with.
So
Right.
the final antidote is what it's telling us is that get rid of your self-cherishing mind.
That's the end goal, yeah.
Right. Through the practice of Tonglen.
Well, the practice of Tonglen especially is how we can take our suffering that we're experiencing and transform it into a part of our path of practice. And by doing that, you know, the important thing to remember too, as we come across these like remedies, this is not going to remedy our experience of suffering right now, right? So for instance, we'll get there when we get to verse 10. So verse 10 talks about suffering in the body, right? If you engage in this Tonlen practice, you're not going to get rid of the physical suffering of your body. But what you will do is, when you've cultivated this whole practice fully, you are stopped creating the conditions for future suffering of the body to happen, right? So you're not going to be able to stop the ripening of karma you've already created. You know, and there are ways that we can purify karma, things like this. But in general, we've created that karma. Now we have to deal with it. But usually what happens is when we experience suffering, as we were saying before, we then engage in more non-virtuous actions because we want to be free from suffering. So we'll do anything we can because we don't understand what actually caused that suffering, right? Or when we experience things we like, we run after them because we don't really understand where they came from. So both of those things, anything that is a sense of worldly pleasure or worldly suffering, if we don't react to it in a smart way, we just create more suffering for ourselves. We run after suffering with both of our hands and grasp onto it and think this is happiness. And we just cause this negative feedback loop. So what this practice is doing is it's not going to get rid of the suffering we have right now, but what it is going to do is help us prevent creating the conditions for future suffering, right? So that's an important thing to remember, because just practicing Tonglen isn't going to, get rid of your arthritis or something like this. You know what I mean? It would be nice if it was, but that's not how the mind works. I remember when I was in grad school, we had a guest teacher in one of my classes, and he was a part of an American lineage of Theravada practice in America. And I don't remember the context, but we're talking about different meditations, and I suggested something about doing Tonglen practice. And he was like, that's just like an imaginative joke. Like, what's the point of that? It doesn't do anything. And I was like, he's like, you can't really help other people. You can't give away your suffering. I mean, your happiness. It's just all a joke. And I was like, okay. I'm not going to get into an argument with the guest teacher about this, right? But yeah, that's true. Like, me doing Tonglen isn't actually going to take your suffering, and it's not going to give you my happiness. Like, that's not how it works. If it worked that way, then we'd all be Buddhists. Like, the Buddha would have done that a long time ago, right? Tonglen is about transforming our minds so that when we experience suffering, we don't run away from it. We recognize where it came from. We recognize the inevitability of it to some extent. And instead of letting that create more suffering, we use it as the opportunity to open ourselves up, right? And we create a level, a type of equanimity that doesn't allow the wild, like, roller coaster ride of samsara to bring us high or low, but we stay the same. We have that sense of contentment no matter how difficult the outside circumstances are. And Tonglen helps us do that. So Tonglen, if you think Tonglen is going to get rid of other people's suffering, that's not, it would be great, but that's not how it works, The important part of Tonglen is to help transform our mind in such a way that we can experience worldly suffering and not be overwhelmed by it, right? Because we can't avoid that suffering. That's what the most critical of the Buddhist teachings. We can't avoid the suffering because we're samsaric beings. The nature of samsara is displeasure or uncertainty. We can't avoid it. What we can avoid is how we react to it, and whether our reaction creates more suffering or creates less. And what Lojong is, and the practice of Tonglen is showing us, is that if we really want to react to suffering in such a way to create less suffering, the best way to do that is to not focus on ourselves, but to focus on others. If I'm willing to take suffering to benefit you, then I'm getting rid of my self-cherishing mind. That self-cherishing mind is what is causing me to engage in the 8 worldly dharmas that we talked about. It's causing me to engage in all of these unhealthy practices, which then create the seeds for more suffering. So by using my suffering as a way to then create a connection with other sentient beings and to wish for their happiness as more important than my own, what I'm doing is I'm not getting rid of this immediate physical suffering, whatever it may be, but I am getting rid of the emotional suffering I've added on top of it. And I'm creating the conditions for less suffering in the future.
And you're lessening your self-cherishing.
Well, yeah, it all goes together. By lessening your self-cherishing mind, if you can get rid of your self-cherishing mind entirely, then you don't experience suffering. You'll experience physical suffering, but it doesn't bother you in the same way. Like you look at, for instance, you know, a number of you had a chance to meet with His Holiness recently, or be part of his reception line, right, and get his blessing. These days, he doesn't sit like this anymore, right? Because he's 90 years old, and his knees, he shows the aspect of having pain in his knees. When he walks, he has two people helping him walk, right? Because he shows the aspect of being a 90-year-old man with like the physical ailments of a 90-year-old person, right? But for a second, you can trust he has physical pain, right? There's physical pain because he shows the aspect of having a human body, but it doesn't bother him at all, right? It may limit his ability to do things, it may limit his mobility, but he doesn't have any emotional distress as a result of his pain. Whereas most of us do. When you feel sick, you take it personal. You say, how can I be, you create more suffering for yourself. So what this is teaching us to do is that we can't avoid certain types of suffering, but what we can do is not magnify it, right? And the easiest way to not magnify it is to focus on benefiting others. And so but by taking that self-cherishing mind and understanding of it and connecting it to our understanding of karma, what we're doing is it's making it easier for us to not be overwhelmed by that suffering. Because if I can say, well, the reason I'm experiencing this suffering now is because of my karma, because I acted in such and such a way in the past, then it's easier to not let that suffering become like personal, all about me. It's just a natural result of cause and effect. So that's why karma and having conviction in karma is so critical, right? If we don't have conviction in karma, to be quite honest, nothing matters, kind of. You know what I mean? Like, why engage in beneficial activities if karma isn't real? If you don't have some sort of level of conviction, even if it's like a small belief in karma, then it's very easy to become a nihilist because nothing matters. Like my actions don't have results, or my experience of suffering isn't a result of the thing I did. It's due to some pernicious god or due to some other thing. Then it doesn't matter how we behave because those things are out of our control. So having some level of conviction in karma is really important. And so what this text specifically is doing is bringing karma and the Lojong practice together, which is why I think Lojong is so powerful, because I consider it, I call it a meditative technology, which sounds like a very like new agey way of understanding thousands and millennia-year-old Dharma. But Lojong or mind training can be applied to every aspect of our practice. So, recently before this, we studied the Bodhisattva's Jewel Garland by Atisha, where he takes Lojong and he talks about all the stages of the Lamrim, stages of the path, and he uses a Lojong lens to understand every part of it. Or if we study Tome Zampo's 37 Practices of Bodhisattva, he's doing the same thing, where that is a Lamrim text and Lojong text, because he uses Lojong as the clarifying lens to then talk about other aspects of Dharma. So here, especially this first 50 verses or so, he's really combining karma, our understanding of karma, cause and effect, with mind training. So with that, Walford, from my side, let's go through some of these verses. The first one, verse 9, is in general, right? It's kind of setting up this section. And he says, should the impulse arise now to seek our own pleasure, we must turn it aside to please others instead. For even if loved ones should rise up against us, we must blame our self-interest and feel that it's our due. So this is kind of the thesis statement of how we understand karma. And now you should know, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the 8 verses of mind training, right? So the 8 verses of mind training don't give the reason to care. The 8 verses of mind training say, when those I have loved and held dear rise up against me or insult me in crowds, I'll look at them I'll hold them as guru,
And the next
right?
spiritual.
As a teacher. But that's all it said. And that's the practice. But this is saying, why am I doing that? Because I created the cause for that to happen in the first place, right? So this is just taking it one step further, right? It's not quite as pithy, but it's showing a more in-depth explanation, right? And now this language, I have a little bit of difficulty with the language. When we say we feel it's our due, again, karma is not about judgment. And that is the hard thing when we study karma. It can be very easy for karma to feel like judgment. I deserve this. I deserve to suffer because I did these negative things, right? And it's nothing to do with deserving. It has to do with how cause and effect work, right? The language can feel very judgmental. And so we have to be careful with that. because at the same time, we have to accept that our experiences of suffering in this life are due to the actions we created in the past. Most of them are going to be actions in past lives, not things we've done in this life. Some of them might be in this life. Most of them are things we don't have any cognizant memory of, that we created the seed for the suffering now. And the reason that's important is because that is how we figure out to be free from suffering in the future, right? If we don't take that responsibility, then we're never going to be free from that suffering. We're going to just keep creating the causes over and over again. But to try to find a way to accept that responsibility without being judgmental and saying, I'm a bad person because of this, is difficult, especially for those of us that are raised with like very, the idea, what was that?
Moralistic.
Yeah, well, modern mind is, I can't speak to the Indian cultural ideal as much as the Western, but this idea of guilt that like, I'm a bad person because I do these things, because I'm experiencing this, right? And so we have to divorce this idea of judgment, of that kind of guilt from our experiences. And we have to see that those can both be true at the same time. Like I'm responsible, like I created the causes that caused me to be suffering right now. But at the same time, that it's not, my suffering isn't a punishment. It isn't some external force punishing me or judging me. It's just the natural way things happen. That's how cause and effect works. And those can be hard to hold at the same time. So that's the important part of this practice. So this language, for me, is a little difficult. Because karma shouldn't be about flagellation. Like, I deserve this. You know, like that's not going to get you anywhere, right?
So it's saying that our self-interest, like when we seek our own pleasure at the cost of others, the karma that we are creating is that sometime in the future, loved ones will rise against us. Is that what it's saying? I mean,
No,
that's the cause and effect relationship that it's establishing.
What it's saying is here, all of our actions should be motivated by cherishing others more than ourselves, even when those others that we're cherishing are acting in ways that feel harmful to us, right? So the first two lines are saying, even instead of seeking out my own pleasure, I seek out pleasure of others, benefiting others, even when those others are rising up against me. And when they're rising up against me, instead of saying, I don't care about your happiness because you're harming me, you say the reason you're harming me is because I created the conditions in the past that are causing you to harm me now. So you're understanding their action of harm towards you as a result of your own actions in the past, and not allowing that to be a wall that stops you from caring about them.
No, I understand. But is that these actions cause this kind of,
okay.
Like, you know, it's,
Yeah.
Is that what one can
So what we can
conclude from it?
Yes. So again, karma, we've had classes on karma, is a very subtle phenomenon, right? It's one of the hardest things to understand. Only a Buddha can actually say, this experience of suffering right now is due to this exact result. This exact cause, right? So I can't say like my experience of this specific suffering is due to this specific cause. You have to have, only a Buddha can realize that because karma is so subtle. But what we can see is the general trends, right? And so all these verses are going to be showing general trends, which is like, for instance, by being generous, you create the karma to then have wealth. By being miserly, you create the karma that will ripen as being impoverished, right? By engaging in harmful actions, you create the karma that will be you experience others harming you. Like those general ideas of how cause and effect work, higher realized beings are able to recognize that. So every one of these verses is going to show something like that. This first verse is a little more general, right? Because it's not saying that our seeking our own pleasure is due to others rising up against us. But you'll see once we get to the next verses, it's showing a cause and effect reaction between an action we've done that causes a thing. Yeah, so let's go to verse 10, and that can be maybe more clear. We don't have to do more on karma. We'll talk more about karma next week. Because I thought in my head, like you can see my plans, we'd get through all 50 verses today. Because they're self-explanatory, you know, so I thought we'd be able to go through all of them. We've gone through one. That's okay. We have 23 minutes. We get 30 seconds each. Let's go.
Speed reading.
So verse 10, I mean, to be honest, after today's class, you can read through this section on your own. And next week, a lot of it we can go through somewhat quickly. And you have questions, you can ask questions, and we'll spend time on it. But this whole section is pretty self-explanatory, you know? So, but at the same time, we'll go through it. Don't worry. So verse 10. When our bodies are aching and racked with great torment of dreadful diseases that we cannot endure, this is the wheel of sharp weapons returning full circle upon us from wrongs we have done. Till now, we have injured the bodies of others. Hereafter, let's take on what sickness is theirs. So here it's showing the cause and effect result. By in the past, injuring the bodies of others, the result of that is experiencing physical torment and illness now, right? And so, again, we have to remind ourselves as we read this text that the wheel of sharp weapons is not our experience of suffering, but is the ripening of karma. That's important. The way it's written, it feels like the wheel of sharp weapons is our experience of suffering, but that's not the case. It's the actual ripening of karma that we created, right? And I think, for me, this verse, the next verse is suffering in the mind. These are both very general. We have a tendency, contemporary, everyone, I guess. I don't know if it's just contemporary. We relate health and sickness to morality in some ways, right? Look at leper colonies, things like this, like you're considered diseased, and it's not just that you have a physical ailment, it's something wrong with you, right? That's like a natural instinct. And what is important here is that we need to try to divorce that. And again, we can look at suffering as a consequence of negative actions we've done in the past, but there's no moral judgment associated with it, whether it's our own sickness or the sickness of others, Even if it's a sickness that you got because you were, not masked during COVID, you created the conditions to experience that. But to look at that sickness as a moral judgment is not a useful way to engage in, or other sicknesses, moral judgment, right? But it's very easy to create this ideas of morality with health. And it's a very dangerous, slippery slope. And it's one that everyone does in the world right? Which is why mental health is so, there's so much stigma, because people don't want to admit to having mental health issues because they feel that it is somehow speaking badly about them as a person, because that's what they're taught. So as Buddhists, we have to recognize that, yes, karma, what that means is our experience of suffering, both physical and mental, are due to actions we've done in the past. But that is not a judgment of our character. That is a consequence of negative actions. That is not, it isn't a punishment. So there's no relationship there's no moral value to suffering.
Yeah, and when we bring in judgment or moral, then isn't that the dualistic mind again? That we're saying that, you're bad or you did something. It's also bringing in an aspect of the dualistic mind, right? That
it is
somewhere you did something, or you're not okay, or you're bad, or something like that.
It is, but we have to be a little careful, because there is objective virtue and non-virtue, right? Like the 10 non-virtuous actions are always non-virtuous, right? Negative karma is always negative, right? So we can't say like everything is subjective and relative is going too far, right? But the critical thing is to not do it with judgment. So killing is always a non-virtuous action, right? And it's always going to have a non-virtuous result, right? But to say you're a bad person because you did this, that is the step we have to avoid. It's easy to try to get like this relativist position that says nothing, like everything is relative. And that is going a little bit too far, I think, right? And people use the language of non-dual sometimes to push farther than they need to. Like non-dual is showing that things don't exist the way they appear to us, but things do exist. And like non-virtue does exist, and virtuous actions do exist. And so there is like a dividing line. Now, of course, it's not black and white, right? Like when we study karma, especially when we study the 10 non-virtues, we understand that like karma is often mixed. Like you have a good motivation by engaging in harmful action, and therefore it's either heavier or lighter and things like that. It's not all one or all the other. It's not a zero-sum game, but it's not all relative either, right? So we have to just be a little careful.
So there are nuances, right?
Yeah, well, there's nuance, but to some extent, there's nuance that if we want to understand it in all of its specificity, takes a lot of study. But in general, it's almost common sense, right? Like on my way walking here today, I probably killed a number of insects without meaning to. So we can accept that act of killing was harmful, was a non-virtuous action, but I didn't mean to do it. So therefore, it can't be as harmful as if I meant to kill insects. Like that is just common sense. So if you want all the fine minutiae details, that is a lot of study. But just in general, you can recognize that things aren't all black and white, right? But then you don't want to get too far to say like, well, everything is relative. And non-duality doesn't mean that everything is relative. There is still virtue and non-virtue, right?
And even venerable, even like let's say I'm a smoker and then I get lung cancer. So then there is,
Mhm.
so that there is, and of course, my doctor will say, well, you got what you deserved. You smoked all your life.
Mhm.
And so how do we see that then?
We can't deny worldly cause and effect either, right? Like karma isn't necessarily talking about worldly karma cause and effect, but that is worldly cause and effect. But so the person who gets lung cancer because as a direct result of their smoking habit, does that mean they're a bad person? No, of course not, right? And we can say your illness is due to the actions you engaged in this life, or most likely, right? We can say those things. We can look at that worldly cause and effect, but it doesn't mean you deserve to suffer. It doesn't mean you deserve that you're a bad person, you deserve suffering. It means that we can see the logical chain of events that you engaged in that had this result, right? And so in that way, we can say you are responsible for this insofar as you did X, Y, and Z. This is the result. It's a very clear order of events. But usually with those statements and you're a bad person because of it. That goes unspoken, but it's there, right? So what we have to try to do is recognize when there are worldly cause and effect or worldly situations that we can avoid, we should avoid them, right? So being a peacock in the poisonous grove, like when we can avoid difficult circumstances, especially for us who are new on the path, just baby practitioners, we should try to avoid them. Like we don't have to go seek out suffering. I promise there's going to be enough suffering that we'll find suffering to use as part of our practice. We don't have to go seek it out, right? And so that also means when we see that I'm doing a worldly action that's causing worldly harm right now, such as smoking or other bad habits like that, karma is looking at a much bigger time frame than just this life alone. But the same, if I have the chance or I can avoid this thing, then I should do it, right? So we have to have both those at the same time, right? So yes, this is your fault for having smoked your whole life, sure, but it doesn't mean you're a bad person, and it doesn't mean you deserve to suffer. That's the important thing. Saying it's your fault and saying you deserve to suffer aren't the same thing, you know. And the flip side of that is, who knows? Like I'm sure you've met people in your life who smoked literally packs of cigarettes their whole days and have no sickness. And I have very good friends who died of lung cancer who would never touch a cigarette in his life. And he was 35 years old. He got lung cancer and died in 6 months, never having touched a cigarette in his life. Right. So who knows? I mean, so that we'd say is both of those instances are karma, right? They created the causes. And for us, the important thing is like when you see people who, by all objective measures, seem quite horrible people, getting everything they want and not experiencing worldly consequences to their very harmful actions. You have to, it's hard, but what's important then is you realize that's a result of positive actions they've done in the past. So they're having positive karma ripen and they're wasting it. Can there be anything worse than that? That actually is an opportunity and a motivation to have compassion for them, which is really hard because they're hurting others, right? But think about you're given everything, and instead of using it, you waste it. That's even worse than if you don't have anything and you waste it, right? Because you're having all this positive karma ripen, giving you all these conditions where you could do so much worldly benefit and internal benefit, and instead you're using all of that to hurt others, right? So that you're not just causing negative karma for the future, but you're wasting positive karma you already created, right?
Right. But it also then, to me, begs the question that if this person was so good, and we know such a person who, like is experiencing the positive. So all the positive actions which are now ripening for him, having all this wealth and power and everything, it didn't do anything to his mind. How can that be? Didn't it leave positive imprints in? I mean, don't we say that it leaves positive imprints in the mind, doing all the virtuous actions that he must have done in the past to enjoy the fruits of,
I see. Yeah. It's a good question.
wealth and power, and the world listening to him and whatever. It did nothing. How can that doesn't add up, does it?
No. Wait. So that's a good question. The way we have to look at it, we have to understand that our actions, our karmic actions, are multifaceted, and one action has one physical action right now will have multiple causes and multiple results, right? So create multiple karmic acts, right? Or multiple karmic seeds. So hypothetically, in whatever past life, when these people engaged in this virtuous action, they also had some sort of transformation of mind. But those seeds aren't ripening right now because the conditions for things to ripen, right? For our experience of suffering in the world, or experience of anything in the world, we have the immediate causal condition. We have the say in English, the
System condition.
no, you have let's just say the environmental condition. We have the cause, the condition, and then the immediately preceding action. Like those three types of causes for every action we experience, or for every one of our experiences, is going to have those three kind of causes, right? So the karmic actions we've created, that's the causal condition. It has to meet the right conditions. I know environmental conditions.
Circumstantial.
Circumstantial, thank you. Circumstantial conditions. It has to meet the right circumstantial conditions for that causal condition to ripen, right? And so these people have created the causes for wealth, power, success, and those conditions are being met with right now. But the other things they've created causes for, such as virtuous minds or happiness, or actual happiness, those conditions aren't present for whatever reason. And the important thing to look at is, I mean, we can imagine we're talking about contemporarily certain politicians, right? If you look at them, do you think they're actually happy? Do you think they experience happiness? Or their lives are like a constant tumult of like judgment and hell that they've created for themselves? I'm not like, I have compassion for them, but they've created a situation for themselves. But like, they're not happy. Not in the way we are trying to be happy. Not in the type of equanimity and mind that isn't so like, I mean, look at Trump. Someone says something about him on the news, and then you have thousands of words in a tweet because he has to respond because his ego is so fragile that he is so dependent on others, approval and so forth, that he doesn't have any sense of self that isn't based on what others say about him, right? That's not happiness, right? So we can look at their power, their wealth, their strength, and we say, is that happiness though, right? So yes, you're right that in the past they created conditions. You'd expect that in the process of creating those virtuous causes, they also transform their mind to some extent, but it doesn't have to be one-to-one. And the conditions that are ripening in this life for them aren't the ones that allow them to remember that mind for whatever reason.
Oh, so one can create good conditions in this life, work and, try your best to benefit others and such like. And then in the next life, you might just be a complete...
That's what we say when we practice Dharma, we create the habits, right? So Dharma practice, meditation, is by creating new habits, right? To meditate is to become familiar with something. So what we're doing is becoming familiar with virtue with the intent that in our future lives, regardless of what conditions we're in, we'll have already familiarized our minds with virtue, so that will be our habit. But you can create positive conditions that aren't connected to pure virtue. And don't forget, we're talking lifetimes and lifetimes and lifetimes. So the virtue, the positive conditions he created, he may have, engaged in those causes millennia ago, and they're ripening now. So in that interim, a lot has happened where his mind has gotten away from whatever virtuous activity in the future.
Seems a bit hopeless when you...
It does seem hopeless until you... It's hopeless if you don't look at your own mind and to see how has your mind transformed through your practice. I know that I can look at my practice. I've been practicing a few decades, but even if I ignore that, if I look at my very earliest practice when I started when I was in college and look at, let's say, the first 2 years of my practice, I can look at a wild transformation in my mind. And not to say I have any realization, I don't have any realization or understanding of the path, but my mind was so overwhelmed, especially by anger as a teenager, that even a baby understanding of meditation in the mind was wildly transformative to me. And that's part of the reason why when I continued in my studies in the Dharma and when I decided to become a monk, my whole family was like, yeah, of course you're going to become a monk, right? But, and none of my family is Buddhist, you all know this, right? Like my life partner, he wasn't Buddhist. And all of them, when I said, I'm going to give up everything, move to India, they're like, yeah, of course you are. Because they saw the transformation that I had experienced, right? So I have confidence in that, right? And I don't And I know, due to my study, that I must have done something right in the past lives to meet with certain teachers in this life, to meet with the Dharma. Like I've created conditions for a perfect human rebirth. I've done all these things, but I can see in this very life transformation in my mind. And so I have confidence in that. And that is what gives me hope. Right?
Yeah.
So we have to use our own practice because it's easy to be hopeless. Because samsara is hard. And right now it's really hard. Okay. So I appreciate that hopelessness seems like the default response. And it's an understandable response. That's what makes it really pernicious. It's understandable. We have to find hope within it because there's always hope. So you and I were talking earlier about the protests in Minnesota, right? They're awful. But we look at the people who are going to those protests who have never protested before, right? Even people who voted for Trump. I heard an interview literally today with someone who said, I was one of the researchers who helped develop Project 2025. And I'm never going to vote Republican again because they're committing atrocities in our streets, right? And that's not, one person isn't going to change the political climate, but we see instances of people caring about their neighbors, people standing up to authoritarian regimes who would never have imagined doing that, right? So those are opportunities for us to see like little glimmers of light, right? And that's how we keep away hopelessness. And that's what we have to, as I said in the very beginning, have a regular practice because those are hard to see. Or they can be hard to see. But when we create a spiritual practice that is regular, whether it means coming to a center and listening to teachings or doing practice on your own, doing study on your own, that repeat practice, referencing that repeat familiarization with virtue and with seeking out the virtue of others is what is going to let us find hope when there's difficulty. Having hope doesn't mean you're a good organizer. Having hope doesn't mean you have an answer to solve what's happening in the world, but it does mean that you can continue moving in a way that's meaningful, right?
Thank you. Yeah, that makes sense.
And in a very big picture way, when we see the atrocities, all of us who are watching are connecting with our own sense of compassion that why can't that be there? So it's very interesting, right? Like one person's example of being atrocious or whatever is somewhere making us dip into our own sense of compassion and awakening that in us.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting how that is.
It's important, especially in a time like now, that we can we can look at these things that are happening and try to have compassion for everyone, which is the hard thing. I studied with Jan Willis, who was a teacher in my undergraduate. She was one of the early students of Lama Yeshe. Small little black lady who marched with King from Alabama. And she talks about her time when she met Dharma. And in the 70s, she met with His Holiness. And because in the 70s, you could literally walk through Dharamsala and you'd meet His Holiness secretary. It's like, hey, I want to have an interview with His Holiness. And they're like, yeah, come by tomorrow. So she got to meet His Holiness. And at that point, she was a member of the Black Panther Party. She was in charge of women's security at Kent State, where she handed out guns to protect against the riots, the police that came. She was engaged in really wildly activist activities. And she met with His Holiness, and she said, how can I go to these protests and face down the pigs and still have bodhisattva vows? And he said, you do that by loving them. That you are outraged at their acts of indecency and their violence, but you don't hate them. You have to stand opposed to them and their actions and love them while you do it. That is what is called on a bodhisattva. That's why it takes courage to be a bodhisattva. So we look at these, agents who are causing such violence and harm, and we do everything in our power, whatever our personal conditions may be, to stop it in some way and to support our neighbors in some way. But we have to love everyone while we're doing it. That's the hard thing. If you go to a protest with hate in your heart, you're not helping anyone. You may cause some temporary benefit, but you're not actually helping in the big picture, in the dharmic picture. So we have to find a way to develop, which is why it's already done. It's 7:00. When I talk about protest, I grew up in a very activist modality, right? And the university I went to was very much like left-wing agitating protests. Like that's what we did. And I think there's a place for outrage. I think outrage itself is a type of compassion that looks at injustice and is upset by that injustice and wants to do something about it. But it's not the same thing as anger. Anger is wanting to cause harm to others. looking at people that are engaging in harm and wanting to harm them back. And for most of our lives, our outrage and our anger are interwoven. We don't separate them. So we say, it's good to be angry. This anger is righteous. This anger is useful. It fuels me, right? That's how we talk in worldly language. And we see, look at these protests and say, we should be angry at ICE agents, at the president, whoever. The difficulty with that is that anger is only going to blind us to how to be a benefit. It's only going to poison us. So we have to find a way to identify our outrage, right? At how we are that we see injustice and we are upset by it, but not allow that to be mixed with anger that wants to cause harm to others. Because outrage is a type of compassion. Outrage can be a wish to have others be free from suffering, right? That's what compassion is. May also name means be free from suffering. The wrathful version of that is outrage, that sees injustice and suffering and wants to do something to change it. But if it's mixed with anger, it's not going to benefit us. And there may be temporary short-term gains, that they're always, you can see those things, but they don't last, you know. And even if you look at nonviolent resistance outside of a Buddhist spiritual lens, nonviolent resistance in the way it's talked about by Gandhi and ML and Martin Luther King and other people who are nonviolent resistors, if you discount karma, discount the spiritual aspect of it, you don't create a type of peace that isn't fragile. Whatever you build off of violence is always going to be fragile and ready to rupture at the next moment of violence. So you need nonviolence as a way to create a foundation that will hold, right? And the only way to have real nonviolence is to not have anger, you know, to not have that poison in our hearts. And so when we look at these atrocities that are happening, we have to, and we look at the really horrific violence that is happening, we have to try to have love and compassion for the people that are enacting that violence as well. Because if we're selective, you know, we at the opening prayers, we said, may all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness, not just the sentient beings that are nice, you know? And that's the hard part. That literally why it takes courage to be a bodhisattva, is because it isn't easy, you know? If it was easy, then it wouldn't be worth it really, because it wouldn't have value. It wouldn't be transformative, is what I should say. Okay, so that was a little bit off topic. We got through one verse instead of 50, but you know, it's been a few weeks off. It's okay. Get back in the groove of things. Do we have any questions you want to talk about this text or about anything we brought up today?
Yeah, I have a question. It's not about the text.
That's okay.
It's so when we went to Mungod last week, this week, we saw His Holiness in the aspect of a frail 90-year-old person. But there are 90-year-olds who are not as frail as he is, who are quite sprightly.
Yeah.
But that's because he has chosen to be a frail 90-year.
Yeah, so the way we, as people who have a guru relationship with him, who understand him to be a Buddha, we recognize that all of his actions are deliberate. So him choosing to display the body of a human being in general is the Buddha of compassion choosing to be a human being, and then choosing to have whatever illnesses he's had, the contemporary like old age and infirmity he's having is all intentional on his part. So as his students, we have to say, what are we learning from this? What is he teaching us? You know, and even the Buddha himself showed the aspect of passing away to remind us of impermanence, right? And that old age, and sickness, old age, and death are guarantees in samsara. And so as samsaric beings, we can't avoid those things. And so even though he isn't a samsaric being, he's displaying that for us because there's some benefit in it, you know. I can't begin to do whatever calculus he's doing, you know, like why doesn't he show a healthiness now and then sickness in 10 years? Like, you know, he's got a mind that can see more pieces of the game board than I can see. But we have to, you know, the hard thing is balancing. I don't know if any of you met Dr. Barry Curzon, who's an American who for a long time is His Holiness's private doctor. He's a monk.
I follow him on Instagram.
And I met him, when did I meet him? 2012, when His Holiness Dalai Lama was at Sergei for the Long Room teachings, and he hung out with us a little bit. And it's hard. You can imagine, like, if you're devoted to His Holiness, you see him as a Buddha, but you're also responsible for his physical well-being, that you have to also see him as a very human patient and treat him as a very human patient, not as Buddha, because otherwise you're not doing your job. And so that guru devotion for him is like a very difficult thing, right? Because he has to deal with like the fleshy, gross human parts of His Holiness, right? That we don't have to as devotees. But as His Holiness is aging in front of us, we come face to face with it, that we have to deal with those things. So it's a very skillful teaching. I can't give you all the reasons for it, but I imagine that different students will receive different benefits from it in some ways. Yeah. But it is a profound experience to even meet him now. You know, when I met him, it didn't happen this time, but when I met him last year in Tashilumpo, very similar situation. I was with CKSL then. There were maybe 2 dozen of us. And
2000.
no, 2 dozen. I remember Sir Venerable Namjong was there with me. We were the first two in line, right? Because we were the teachers. For some reason, His Holiness seemed larger than life to me. You know, and I've met him in person numerous times, right? I've had him make fun of me in front of a crowd of, a couple hundred people, even do one of these to me. So like I've had that experience with him. But this, I just looked at him and I was, kneeling in front of him. He just seemed bigger than a normal human being. And then you step back and you're like, oh, you're actually a frail old man. But for like a moment, I just had this moment where I was like, what is going on? And like you were saying, you sometimes have this moment when you're with holy beings where you like step outside of yourself and don't experience reality in the way you normally do. And so I had one of those moments. So I'm grateful that many of you had the chance to meet him again last year. And when you get those moments, you just have to hold on to them and say, okay, like how can I create the conditions where this is the way of being in my life, right? And how can I create the conditions for others to experience it as well? Yeah. Sometimes also, we're coming up on Losar. Sometimes the Buddhas do things just to inspire us. So Losar, the first 2 weeks of Losar, we celebrate the Days of Miracles, right? And the Days of Miracles, the Buddha literally engaged in these miraculous acts every day for 15 days. And at first he did it because there were these non-Buddhists who were challenging him and saying, you don't have any realizations, right? And so they like had a miracle off, basically. And they had to show each other up. And so the Buddha took like a miracle, like, he took a stick and he cleaned his teeth with it, and then he put it in the ground and a tree grew out of it. And then the wind blew through the tree and you could hear the teachings of Dharma from the wind as it blew through the leaves. That was one of his miracles. And after, I think, 8 days, the other non-Buddhists were like, hey, we give up. And he's like, I'm just going to keep going. And so he did 15 days of miracles, not because he was showing off, but because it was inspiring for people. And, our world, the contemporary world is kind of devoid of magic these days, right? But you can imagine 2,500 years ago in India, miraculous things like that were, I don't want to say commonplace, but they were accepted in a way that they weren't accepted here. They aren't accepted now. If His Holiness the Dalai Lama tomorrow had the body of like a 40-year-old and was perfectly healthy, everyone would freak out and he'd be put in a lab somewhere, right? So he can't display miracles the way that would be possible back then, just because the environment's different. You have to teach according to what the students need. But so sometimes the teacher's actions are purely about inspiration, right? They're purely to make the students feel delighted about the Dharma. We talked about some of the worldly cities you can achieve, the like being able to fly, being able to like walk through walls. And whenever you read about these, they always say these don't matter. They're only useful if you can inspire others towards the Dharma because of them. Like otherwise, they're just party tricks. They don't really matter at all. They're very easy. That's how it's always talked about in the literature. Anyone can achieve these things. And you're like, okay, you say so. But they're always dismissed. Just like, this doesn't matter at all. It's a party trick. It's useful if you can inspire someone. But if otherwise, it doesn't matter, right? So sometimes holy beings just have a presence about them that you can't explain, but it inspires something in you, right? It inspires us to practice more, to be more compassionate, to try to model our life after their life. And so it's very wonderful that you had a chance to have an audience with them. That's great. Anything else? No? Okay. So any questions online? I don't think so. So we didn't get very far today. I would encourage everyone to look at this next section, especially at home. There are digital copies of the text that will be distributed. If you're online now, I'm sure that they can share one, and they can also share it to the group chat if you don't have a copy, or you can contact someone and get a copy. Or if you're here in person, you can borrow one of these copies. I'm sure that's also fine that we have here. Try to read through verse 48 by next week. That's the section on karma. And
it will be available online also.
It's definitely available online. It'll be different translation. I've read some translations that are nicer than this, some that are less clear. Don't worry about that. But try to read that before next week. And we'll try to go through those verses next week. We'll see how far we get. I apologize for not getting very far today, but
We asked like so many questions when each
that's okay.
line.
Like I said, that's how teachings are supposed to happen. It's okay. We have all the time. Okay, so do other questions. With that done, let us offer some dedication prayers. So when we engage in any activity, we want our activities to be virtuous in 3 ways, which is to say virtuous in the beginning, and the middle, and the end. We create virtue in the beginning by setting a motivation that is focused on bodhicitta, that we study for the benefit of others, not for our own benefit alone. That makes our practice virtuous in the beginning. And then by studying the Holy Dharma, by looking at our minds, by trying to develop a mind of bodhicitta and compassion for ourselves, our practice is virtuous in the middle. And then to make our practice virtuous at the end, to seal it, we offer dedication. So we recognize that we have accumulated some karma, some merit, some good karma here for our practice today. And instead of wishing for that karma for our own benefit, we develop the mind that wants to give that karma away, that good merit away to others, that it may ripen on others. So develop a mind and the wish that any merit you've accumulated this evening through your study, reflection, and meditation on the Dharma, on the Wheel of Sharp Weapons, any of that merit, instead of ripening on yourself, may ripen on all other suffering sentient beings, that they may be free of suffering, that those who are ill may experience relief from their illness, that those who are suffering any of the suffering of hunger or thirst or the body may find relief, that any who have died may quickly have a perfect human rebirth and meet with the holy Mahayana teachings, that we all may have the opportunity to continue studying with holy gurus, that all holy wishes may be achieved without any obstacles, and that our karma, our merit itself, may ripen in our quickly achieving Buddhahood for the benefit of other sentient beings. So with this strong dedication in mind, we'll offer 2 verses of dedication. And if you are on page 36 in our gold book, we'll offer the first 2 verses in English, then we'll repeat the second verse in Tibetan once, and then we'll offer the short long life prayer for His Holiness. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel of bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Choe Khor Sum Ma Ke Panam Ke Gyur Ke Wanyam Pane Payam Gonde Gonde Pelo Esho. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good, all-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso. Please remain until samsara ends. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate all of you. I'm glad to be back.
And thank you.
Thank you for your teaching, always so